Susan, Gregory, David, Ambassador Evans, for your continued presence and application of American values and ideas to foreign policy abroad, to Levin and Ani, and many, many others who are at the forefront, whether in Armenia or virtually, of what became known as the Ba Revolution, the Hello Revolution in Armenia, which is still underway. 6 months ago, very few people in the Armenian reality, analysts, policymakers, diplomats, patriots, thought that the Armenian people could go to the polls, defy their own odds of fatalism and disappointment and disenchantment and emigration, and quietly vote their conscience for change in the new Republic of Armenia. I've said before, and it is not an original thought, that the Armenian nation is long on culture, civilization, the first Christian nation, but because of the tragedy of our history, we have had a very poor and a short-lived experience in terms of statecraft. May 28th, a few days ago, marked the 95th anniversary of the First Republic of Armenia, over which President Woodrow Wilson wanted a U.S. mandate, but the isolationist Senate under Senator Henry Cabot Lodge thought otherwise, and Armenia ultimately, as you know, was partitioned between Bolshevik Russia and nationalist Turkey, the lion's share of historic Armenia, historic Western Armenia, later becoming part of the Republic of Turkey. We have had long interludes of subjugation of different empires, occupations, genocide, and so 21 plus years ago, the Armenian people returned to the world stage to carry out, in the absence of a U.S. mandate and in devolution from the Soviet legacy, a Republic of Armenia that is into its third decade and is still trying to find its democratic identity and the delivery of rights to its own citizens, which we demand of the world and our neighbors in terms of history and genocide recognition and recognition of the liberty and sovereignty of the Mountainous Karabakh Republic. All these issues, democracy and rule of law, the national interest, and the sovereignty of the Republic of Armenia are connected one with another. These are this is the triad of Armenian national identity. And so before we talk about the pursuit of Armenian national interests and the restoration of justice on the eve of the 100th anniversary of the genocide and great national dispossession of the Armenian people, it was more than genocide, because we lost not only 1.5 million people, but a homeland, a civilization, churches and schools, a way of life. And before we pursue with our friends in the United States and Europe and Russia the application of the rule of law, not only at home, but in international relations, saying, hey, wait a minute. Kosovo, sui generis, is an artificial construct. I can say that as a former international lawyer. We're talking about rule of law in Armenia, which I demand as a citizen of Armenia. And that rule of law should apply also in the international community. We all know that the Soviet Union began its downfall parallel with the destruction of the fall of the Berlin Wall, with massive demonstrations by the freedom-loving people of Artsakh, of Mountainous Karabakh, demanding a reversal of the Stalinist legacy of divide and rule, saying no to a forced war of aggression by Soviet Azerbaijan, and then Azerbaijan supported from time to time by Moscow, and a pursuit of Armenian rights and a restitution of Armenian identity in the region. That also presumes that Armenia will be able to diversify its foreign security and economic policy, to respect the bilateral relationship with Russia, but not to find its own security and identity in any one camp of states, to build a future of security based on a network of bilateral relationships with partners who also respect Armenia's interests who also respect Armenia's rights and evaluate its role in terms of peace and security and equilibrium in a very charged geopolitical neighborhood. But the source of all of these good things, which must come to Armenia and its relationship with partners from Washington across the world, the basis of this is Armenia's domestic demeanor, the values and the standards that we deliver to our own citizens in the Republic of Armenia, in Artsakh, and to Armenians around the world. And here, unfortunately, our love for Armenia is so great that we dare to be critical, that we want a better Armenia, that we want a democratic Armenia, an Armenia that is developed economically, that has the rule of law, that overcomes the conflict of interest between public service and private gain, which is endemic, which is not run by a few people surrounded by their businessmen or oligarchs of choice, where change comes through elections and not perforce in any other way, where people return from the diaspora, and not the other way around, strengthen and expand the diaspora greater than ever before. We've lost 1.5 million people to emigration in the 21 years of our independence. 1.5 million. And for that, Azerbaijan or Turkey or Russia or US are not to blame. We're to blame for that. Statehood is a commitment of taking responsibility for your own affairs, not seeding your best and brightest. Let them go learn, let them excel, let them take part in international organizations. But an Armenia devoid of its citizens is not an Armenia at all. And I had the honor, as you know, on behalf of our grandparents who never saw that day, of our grandchildren who were not born there, in 1992, to raise the flag at the United Nations. That flag will be there as long as the UN is. But what measure of statehood, what depth of democracy does that flag represent? That is the ultimate test. And we failed that test. And we say that with love and with critique. Power, authority, has never, ever been transferred in Armenia's modern history through free and fair elections. Never. Armenia's administrations have been always reproduced from within. When will the Armenian citizen see the day that her or his vote is properly, not only properly cast against the odds, as it was on February 18th of this year, but is counted correctly, that is not stolen from the people again? When will the candidates be able to find the organizational capacity, the internal support, not only from the citizens who won the election on February 18th, nothing less, and at the same time will garner the support of the Armenian diaspora, citizens in the diaspora who've been stolen from themselves, because 800,000 Armenian citizens who live outside of Armenia's frontiers are not allowed to vote, even at the embassies or consulates of the Republic of Armenia. They're different classes of citizenship. And it is their absence that is often used, together with administrative resources, pressures on public service employees, the use of hospitals and schools and other public buildings, for the propaganda purposes of one candidate, the incumbent in this case. All these things have to change. And for these things to change, the Armenian people have to do more, in my view, than merely go on February 18th defying our odds. No one believed, I believed, they believed, and they did it. And the rest cannot be done virtually. The rest cannot be done in isolation. And it is here that those who want to gain the public trust in Armenia, those who care about Armenian rights and democracy as a way of getting Armenia to a point where we have international reputation and can solve our own issues, liberty for Karabakh, recognition and restitution for the genocide, normalization of relations with Turkey, sovereignty that respects Russia, but first and foremost respects the rights of the Republic of Armenia and its citizens. We can do that only through through ensuring that very same benchmark in the Republic of Armenia. And so it is that over the last several months, we sort of surprised ourselves. People decided on that day to go into the precincts and in unprecedented fashion to vote for change. Over the course of the weeks that followed, whether on a hunger strike in Liberty Square, we've got a lot of solidarity, not only virtually, but in real terms. We were not able to institutionalize that movement and to ensure that the actual results of the elections were registered by the institutions of state. Therefore, we have today a de facto administration, the next in a long series of de facto administrations. And it is my hope that before we get deeper into division and distrust and further emigration and disappointment, that administration, whose representative will be in Washington this week, together with the Georgian and Azerbaijani representatives of state, will take a sharp and deep and sincere look at the track record of this and previous Armenian administrations. And it is here that I believe that civil society has a lot to do. It has developed when everybody, including a lot of political parties, a lot of foreign powers, counted out the Armenian body politic. They went to the polls. And many of them demand change immediately. They want closure. They wanted closure on April 9th, when the acting president took his oath of office, and we on Liberty Square took the oath of New Armenia, where we said New Armenia belongs to all citizens. That this election, if it were conducted in any Western European democracy or the United States, would not have been accepted, would have been invalidated. And so, Armenia stands at a great threshold, first of all, of its own identity, in terms of whether we are able to bring out the best of our values, not only individual excellence, professional creativity, intellect, but also citizenship. The citizenship of belonging to the state, not only taking an oath of allegiance, not only serving in the army, but engaging your citizens in Armenia and across the world, people who live with Armenia, who love Armenia, in the creation of a republic that respects itself. Without self-respect, there can be no international respect of our interests. So it is here that I call upon Mr. Sarkisian once again, as I did from Liberty Square, to give a sober and comprehensive assessment of where we stand as a society and a nation in the Republic of Armenia, and to take immediate and comprehensive steps, not to cover up, but to give full solution to the outstanding issues in Armenia. I suggested, post-election, a second round, at the very minimum, snap parliamentary elections, in order to register the disposition of this unprecedented national revival and to give people a sense of belonging in the affairs of state. Those suggestions were not accepted. And so now, before it gets too late and too drastic, I hope that there will be a public debate and discourse in which you will participate as people concerned with Armenia, people who visited Armenia, monitored elections, been on the human rights and economic development fronts of the Republic, or citizens perhaps, or diasporans who love the country. We need a public critical discourse on where Armenia goes from here. And it's not just about false arguments of security. You know, we live in a tough neighborhood. We have minority issues in Javakh, the Armenian segment of southern Georgia, which demands its own rights, which does not have full cultural, administrative rights. We're flanked to the south by Iran. We have Mountainous Karabakh that deserves recognition. And we have the mother relationship, or lack thereof, with Turkey, which requires closure, which requires a step ahead, at least in the first instance, before the 100th anniversary on April 24th, 2015. So these are issues that we have to entertain, and I think that the Armenian authorities, whether they're de facto or ultimately de jure, whether you look upon me as an elected leader or the leader of the opposition or just a rank and file citizen of the Republic of Armenia, that doesn't matter. But the discourse has to be such that we don't have characters acting in the square of liberty at the elections and thereafter, and then virtual participants. Citizens who are able to go and vote on that day, but still don't have the self-confidence and the backing and the rule of law foundations to bring that secret vote to the square and say, you know what, it doesn't take one day, it's a process. And with all due respect to those who did not participate in the elections, 3 political parties who were represented in Parliament, who neither participated nor endorsed anybody, with all due respect, as a son of the diaspora, to many diaspora organizations who got involved and got excited after the fact only, after the people voted. With all due respect to those who were disillusioned with elections, and you can't change anything through elections. Revolution or nothing. I can understand that frustration and that point of view. But you have to use every single opportunity at your disposal in an uneven playing field against a post-Soviet vertical, where the issue is not only Democrats and Republicans exchanging places and seats of public service, but where the person who loses has a lot more to lose than the seat itself. So how do you get to that society? How do you get to checks and balances? Move from an executive heavy machinery to an independent judiciary. Open up business to investment. Support family businesses and not shut them down. And the variety of other issues we have on the street today. There is a new consciousness in Armenia. And while the historians might evaluate these last months and this last year variously, it is clear that the Armenian citizens, from the environmentalists to the people who are fighting for soldiers' rights, the rights of the dispossessed, consumers' issues, these are all pockets of concern and resistance that when they come together will affect systemic change in Armenia. And I look forward to the day when our partners in the world, and particularly the United States government, will stand with the voice of the Armenian people, both in terms of democratic development, recognition or non-recognition of elections, sending notes of support and congratulations where they're due, and also on Armenia's national interests. A clear statement on the Armenian genocide, on normalization of relations without preconditions between Turkey and Armenia through an exchange of notes, or if Turkey considers its policy prudent, imposing preconditions of its own, as it was in my day of foreign service, then Armenia too must restore the symmetry into the relationship and posit its own preconditions. How easy for us. Lose a homeland, lose 1.5 million people. So it has been the Armenian administrations, to which I have been opposition today. I think the people now have to find a way now to figure out who their administration is. But the Armenian governments have taken the prudent course without preconditions. Exchange those notes, open those embassies in the capitals, and use that relationship to solve the divisive issues, the legacy of the genocide, restitution, cultural heritage, right of return, territorial delimitation, access to the sea, etc. Whatever's on that agenda, hammer it out. But if at Zizar Nagapert, the genocide memorial, on April 24, 2015, if we do not have a change in the Turkish position, if the Turkish family who saved my grandmother's life is not allowed an arena for expression and for heroification and for respect, then the Armenian Republic will have to posit its own preconditions, restoring the symmetry to that relationship. We might say diplomatically that's unhelpful, but that unhelpfulness must be reciprocal, or the other way around. So I do hope that there is a review, a relevant review in the region, among our neighboring countries, and especially in the capitals that count with respect to with NATO partners. So since our meeting today is called a conversation, I don't want to make it a monologue. I will merely say that sort of romantic on Liberty Square, even if you go hungry, ultimately you fight for your tent. That's, you know, where the democracy movement began, and you can take it a long way further. But there comes a point where you understand that you can't do it alone. There comes a point where people come up to you and say, what a sacrifice, this is unprecedented change. But that unprecedented change will not happen unless the Armenian people of different political persuasions and civil society get on the same page and develop the political agenda to demand democracy and rights and separation of powers at home, accountability of the governors before the governed, etc. All those things we learned growing up in the United States. The United States is not always there on those issues, unfortunately. And these are things that have to change. I confess to you, they must change first and foremost in Armenia. We take responsibility for those. And I do think we have a young generation that is civically active, that is well educated, and is prepared to take over the levers of responsibility. Our generation has to deliver to that generation at least the basic mechanisms of inclusion, of return. If the tide of emigration continues, as it does, for the next 5 years, Armenia will face a demographic crisis. And I return to the false argument that all incumbents have made in Armenia, that, well, if you don't stop the protests, or if you don't do this or that, if you press the rights of the people, our national security will suffer. Because Azerbaijan wants to attack Karabakh, and so on and so forth. There can be, in the modern world, even for landlocked Armenia, no national security when the citizen is dispossessed, is divorced from the policy-making process, from the political process. And that's why we find ourselves at this perennial, but this time critical crossroads. Official results say 37%. Well, thanks for those official results. But the real results were quite different. It's not for me now to press the math. The official math was wrong and has been wrong. But we were not capable as a nation yet. I was not capable as the candidate to create the wherewithal, the force, and the belonging of the very people who voted to go beyond that private act of confidence and to move it into the public domain. How do we turn the private rejection of fatalism into a public act? And on that day, there were people who've gone through 5 or 6 cycles. They've seen how it is. They've had everything stolen from them, their elections, and some of their properties as well. But they stuck with it, and they wanted a solution. My approach was to avoid any violence, to offer a new political culture between policeman and citizen. Was that right or wrong? You tell me. Is the only way to democratic progress in the post-Soviet space through confrontation, through bloodletting? 5 years ago there was some. 10 people lost their lives. What did we get out of it? We also know that what did we get out of by not doing it? And so it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress, and I have made a commitment, whether through the Heritage Party, but more importantly, through a citizens' movement for a new Armenia, working with other political forces, working with the average citizen who defied the odds to make sure that Armenia has the ability, through elections, which will be preterm. I don't think this administration will be able to make it unless it reaches out to the people and changes its policies radically. How can we deliver results electorally? We have one more chance, I think. They will be preterm, in my opinion, because the alternative to that is further emigration and the risk of revolution. The Armenians, while we've had revolutionary parties, we've overcome subjugation of the Ottoman and Russian empires. We might say that societally, we're not a revolutionary nation. We're conservative, if you will, family-oriented. But there might come a breaking point, a tipping point. And I think that any tipping point for Armenia would be extremely dangerous in terms of the international dimensions and the regional realities in which we live. But at the same time, that might be the only way, unless the Sarkisian administration comes forth immediately with a program for national reconciliation, which would include new elections, and the engagement of the people who took part in this national revival. Time for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hovanissian, for those inspiring words. First, for his selfless commitment to values, the values that we all share here. And secondly, for speaking passionately. And third, for the roadmap, a sense of where you're going. And fourth, just in terms of your personal sacrifice. And I think you did a pretty effective job of the Armenian guilt. You know, the sense of we need to continue to think about our own country and our heritage and the like. And so what I propose is, why don't you just call on folks yourselves, if that's fine with you?
Yes, please.
Okay, Dr. Hovanissian, thank you so much for very interesting presentation. I am Mikhail Mamedov. I am from Georgetown University. First of all, it was very interesting presentation. Well, Soviet Union collapse was disintegrated in 1991, but to my mind, all these three republics, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, since that time, they embarked not on building democracies, but building ethnocratic societies. 400,000 Armenians were purged from Azerbaijan, and as you know, 250,000 Azeri people were living in Armenia, and they all were forced to leave this republic. So Georgians also tried to squeeze Abkhazians who living on the territory of Georgia, and Ossetians, and they were forced to leave their homelands, and Georgians were forced from Abkhazia, but I'm not talking about these republics. I think that the major obstacles for building democracy in Armenia and Azerbaijan, that these republics, they failed to include ethnic minorities in their societies. And look, for example, in Georgia in 2003, we had more or less democratic elections. And the result was that in 2008, Georgia Mikhail Saakashvili started war for reintegration of Abkhazia and Ossetia into its territory. What do you think, what would happen if we had, for example, democratic election in Azerbaijan, if new people will come to power in Azerbaijan? Won't we have a new war for integration of Karabakh? What, isn't the democracy also contains certain danger?
I mean, yes, I mean, I don't want to...
Well, I'm not arguing that...
I don't want to wax romantic
in the hands of conservative and some kind of, I don't know, corrupted old regimes, but don't you think, well, first of all, this democracy, it fails in all the societies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Yeah, I do think that democratic standards, both in terms of substance and especially democratic process, should be part of the evaluation of these countries and what they stand for. I think the countries have failed each in its own way. It gives me no solace that Azerbaijan or Belarus or any other countries might have more problems with authoritarian rule or ruled by dynasty than Armenia. I'm concerned about Armenia, but I think your critique applies in general to the post-Soviet republics. When I had the honor of representing Armenian international relations, and I told Secretary Rubin today at the State Department, Armenia was perceived as the oasis of democracy, and so it felt sort of good coming to the State Department and going around the world, exchanging notes, establishing diplomatic relations. But we lost that advantage, that edge, because of our own domestic comportment. And now the Georgians have sort of gained the edge. I see my youth in them, and I warn them not to be too arrogant, because things can change. We always have to work every day to meet our credentials. But I do think that good elections and democratic comportment in Armenia, in Azerbaijan, in the Mountainous Karabakh Republic, in Georgia, are very important standards against which to judge those societies and those republics, and whether they are worthy of taking their place in the international community. So I would say yes, Armenia has a smaller minority than the others. You mentioned the 400,000 Armenians who were expelled from Azerbaijan. There are also Azerbaijani refugees and IDPs. But I do think that democracy is indeed one of the standards that should be applied in assessing not only each republic unto itself, but also the conflict
But
situation.
can you build democracy by after expelling ethnic minorities? How questionable is this democratic society when minorities are expelled and after that you start building democracy?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I think that it is possible. I think those people who have left, some have left voluntarily, others have been deported or expelled, must have a right of return. I mentioned the right of return in the context of Armenian-Turkish relations. I think Armenians must have a right of return to a national home on the other side of Mount Ararat, and I think that as part of a comprehensive solution on the status and integrity of Mountainous Karabakh, I think that refugees and IDPs of all nationalities must have the right to return to their places of residence, and I think it would be very difficult logistically otherwise to await return to start democracy. I think that's an excuse. I think democracy can be initiated pending that return.
So, my name is Shavan, from Armenia. My question is the following. My understanding of the current regime is that basically they have a lot to lose, as you mentioned. And how do you see, is it possible to go and change the regime if you go to war by excluding certain heavy artillery? In your case, it's the violence, right? And the other side is not really excluding that option. So isn't there an asymmetry of actions, and what do you think about that?
Asymmetry?
Well, my understanding of your options on the table was everything besides violence, right?
Let it be clear right now, I'm someone who is in favor of dialogue and pacific resolution of disputes, whether international or domestic. I do not accept the legitimacy of this administration. I believe that this administration stole the election from its own citizens. At the same time, I'm not willing to engage that administration, the regime, on its own terms, force against force. But I think that Armenian society has to develop to a point where you can deliver the people's vote in a peaceful way. If we don't do that, and if I don't contribute to that, or you, or people who believe that, that other option will happen one way or another. The steam will, the tipping point will happen. I don't want it to happen, on my guard at least. But it's very possible. If you're asking whether symmetry in terms of having force against force, armed people against armed people will solve the issue, I don't think so. One might say that Since April 9th, we've had high-level police chiefs who were sort of restricting our right to demonstrate. They've been relieved. There's now a governor whose resignation we had demanded, who is now under fire, but under fire because of a murder that might be attributed to someone in his family. What I'm saying is that these are things that we've sounded the alarm on over time, in a timely fashion, and I hope that we don't have too many more losses. I mean, we've lost soldiers, not only by snipers on the frontier, but in peaceful times, the day of Shina, in peaceful times on the bases. And this is somewhere where xenophobia does not help. I mean, you've got to take responsibility. And I think that is the responsibility of this de facto administration. I do not think we can solve that issue force against force. We have to find another way. And the question is, how do you get a critical mass of quantity and quality in terms of citizens on the same, if not on the same square, at least on the same mission, with the same objective, and to effect that purpose. I'm not a sage. I wish peace for the country that we love, or I love. But I do think that if there are not extraordinary solutions in the next couple of years, the solution which you intimate might take place against our will.
Hi, my name is Ava Gorecki. I attend Mount Holyoke College, and I'm here interning with Armenian Assembly and at the Embassy of Armenia. My question is, so in many of the countries seeking change in the past couple of years, social media has played a huge part. I'm just wondering how you see social media taking part in this, because a lot of people nowadays, especially the young people, aren't or do not want to attend protests because they do turn violent. So social media has been a huge form of spreading the word and expressing discontent. So I was just wondering how you saw that playing.
Well, media and media access are among the areas where I have expressed public commendation for the change that has happened over the last several years compared with 5 years ago. The media, especially in the election context, has been more accessible than in previous years, so there's been progress there. But at the same time, we can say the electronic media, especially television, are less open to providing full information on opposition activities than the social media, although there's been progress there as well in terms of both the public and private TV channels. It's not where we want it to be. I think there could be a greater outreach to include a full multiplicity of views, but the access has improved. The social media have been an alternative way of getting the word out, of getting people engaged. We know that many people were online from CivilNet and Radio Liberty and Ames Plus, Voice of America, and others were there on the spot to deliver that. Internet penetration in Armenia is not such, in my view, that it can make or break an election. Maybe 5 years from now, that will be possible with other social media, Facebook, and so on. I think it has been effective in getting the word out, more for partisan debate than for sort of a structured support of this or that campaign. But there's also a downside to technology, and this is something that we came across and for us to think about in the future, because if this election had happened 20 years ago, when in the foreign ministry only had one fax machine, as Gaudian writes in his book in The Family of Shadows, there was no internet. You had to come to the square to find out what was going on. Now, you might be a supporter, not necessarily a naysayer, but you sit in your home. You sit in your home and you watch what's going on. And some people take it as a soap opera, others are sort of into it, and they live it viscerally, but you live it viscerally. So technology, I think, has led unwittingly, at least in this round of the Armenian elections, to having a lot of supporters stay at home and just follow with a cup of coffee and whatever else. And so these are some of the factors, sort of the technological drawbacks in terms of a democracy campaign.
This is not a planted question, but since a lot of my friends who are working on these efforts are in this room, I would and we're among ourselves, I would really love it if you sort of maybe discuss this. What message do you have for the Armenian American lobby groups who fight on Armenia's issues on behalf of Nagorno-Karabakh, on behalf of the recognition, who often feel that talking about the shortcomings of today's Armenia and publicly talking about it, lobbying for certain things, would hamper their other efforts. In other words, they feel they've got to present a certain kind of Armenia that exists, always better than the neighbor, to be able to have successful efforts in their other sort of genocide recognition and aid and Nagorno-Karabakh recognition. Is that a false choice?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for the Armenian American organizations that are doing their job on the Hill and in the United States as citizens of this country. They have their own challenges, their own agendas and shortcomings. But I think compared with sort of the big state apparatus against which they work, or the apparati, if you will, and in view of the restricted resources, they're doing the job that they can do. But I think that modern day Armenia en route to democracy requires a sort of a reassessment of the agenda and a sort of a recharge of the engines. It might be a fine balance to forge, but I do think that in addition to the traditional agenda, recognition of the genocide, which is a valid demand of Armenian Americans or Armenians around the world, because there's been no closure on that. In addition to budgetary allotments and Mountainous Karabakh and its rights, I do think that there has to be a better coordination of programs to critically assist, or to assist Armenia in its democratic development. It is a fine line because one way or another you deal with a de facto administration. You go and you deal with people, whether de facto or de jure. But I think I would convey the same challenge to our brethren here who are working for the national interests, both U.S. and Armenian national interests, and for their correlation, that I made to the State Department, and that is Armenia really needs, beyond the cliches, a critical engagement. And there's nothing shameful in demanding that critical engagement. I demand, no matter how you view me, in whatever capacity, I value my own humility, but as somebody who carries the responsibility for at least a segment of the population, whatever the math, who want to change and who want change in Armenia, I think there's nothing shameful to enter into a relationship that is critical, that is conditional on Armenia's making muster on democratic and rule of law issues. That also requires the United States to do the same. And so I think that, yes, there is a line where you want to show your country in a good light as compared with the neighborhood. I think Armenia has many areas in which we can compare favorably in our neighborhood, but that does not mean that we cannot be self-critical. And I think that Armenia will progress both in terms of our Yerevan-based policy that has to be more inclusive of the diaspora, and also with our partner organizations in the United States and elsewhere, modernizing the agenda to include a critical look at the Armenian political system and engaging in programs that empower civil society and the average citizen. Having said that, there is an ongoing debate in Armenia. There seems to be an artificial divide. We're at a point of democratic development where you have civil society, and maybe some of this is based on the guidelines that grantor organizations give to Armenian NGOs. You have this perception that you have civil society on the one hand, NGOs that are pure of the dirt of power politics, party politics, who want to pursue thematic agendas of environment and rights of different kinds, but are not willing to sort of come to the meeting point to develop the political agenda. I think this is an artificial divide. I think that there is no such thing as civil society separate from the political process, or there shouldn't be. I think that what I've been doing for the last several months at least, if not longer, has been first and foremost as a citizen of Armenia, as a member of civil society, as opposed to a representative of this or that party. So yes, I think there needs to be a rethinking everywhere.
Hi, I'm Richard from Oxford Radio for Europe. You alluded to the situation going on in Sunik about at least temporary stepping down of the governor, Hassan Trian. I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on your thoughts about what's going on there, if you read something, or if you see something larger coming out of the incident. And also, if you could talk a little bit more about your meetings with State Department officials this week in Washington. What did you ask of them, and how were you received, in your opinion?
Well, among the demands that the people of Armenia made through the elections and thereafter on the square, not only national solutions, snap elections, but also punishment and prosecution of election violators. But many of the governors, including the governor of Sunik, and many others, not just he, were involved in election fraud, in the application of administrative resources to force citizens to vote in one way or another. And we called for his resignation early on. It's just too bad that someone had to be killed. I mean, we did the same with respect to soldiers' rights and so on. So it's obvious that this kind of development will continue, will deepen, will expand. And I think now you have NGOs and civil society now saying, yes, he must be removed. He had to be removed and prosecuted a long time ago. People in the presidential administration had to be removed and prosecuted a long time ago. So I do think that this is something that could be done by the incumbent administration if it had the political will, and not to wait to respond as a champion, as a responsive champion to this or that act of violence by removing belatedly this or that governor. So I do think that this is a function of the people who've been ruling or misruling Armenia for the last several decades. I mean, they're getting nervous. It's a reflection of public pressure. It's a reflection that people are not going to take it much longer. And I think we'll see more of this happening in isolated circumstances initially, and thereafter perhaps you will see a public response that is more organized and more comprehensive. It should have been done. It should have been done long ago.
And on your State Department meetings?
And I met with Deputy Assistant Secretary Eric Rubin today. That was the only meeting that I had. I'm in Washington only for today. I leave for Yerevan tonight. I'm sort of a public kind of guy who's coming off a campaign, and so what I say privately is exactly the same thing that I say publicly.
Once again, thank you for your speech. My name is Hamlet Tamazian. I'm also from Armenia. My question is twofold. First, the resources of Armenia have already been kind of distributed to foreign governments, countries, or companies. Therefore, we are somehow dependent on them, such as France for water supply, maybe telephones to Russia, to Russian companies, and so on. So we are somehow dependent on them. And second of all, the current government is somehow intertwined, of course, as you know, and the current ideology of Armenian government, whether the president or other positions, are somehow connected. If you were elected, you would have been one man at the top of this administration. what would have been some steps to deal with both situations, whether the dependency on foreign countries or the current situation that Armenia faces in the government? This is a very difficult question, I understand, but some steps maybe that anyone
Just
can take.
for the record only, but not to pursue the issue. For the record only, I was elected. So, thereafter, part of the campaign, and the campaign program, was that we would move to a parliamentary form of government, to a new constitution. The new constitution would have an independent prosecutor's office that would have the authority to review and prosecute all crimes, or all alleged crimes, wherever in government, from the presidency on down. Because we know that conflict of interest is endemic. It's everywhere. We feel, we disagree with the U.S. approach on the International Criminal Court. We feel that Armenia should accede to the International Criminal Statute. And since Armenia continues to be a place, unfortunately, where we have rule by example, we're still not a society up society, but we'll get there. I think our candidacy was different from many of the others because I have no business there. I have no economic interest. I have nothing to gain or to lose financially. And it was in this sense someone out of the conflict of interest establishment in Armenia who was challenging the incumbency. And it was for that reason, I believe, that we got a lot of unexpected votes, because people wanted that change, because they saw that there was the capacity to change the system by personal example. No nepotism, no oligarchs, no people to sell off monopolies to. And even in terms of foreign relations, while naysayers, when they had nothing else to say in terms of a policy debate with me, whether they agreed or not, the naysayers would bring up my American birth, that I was born in the United States. That was sort of their final talking point by default, when they had nothing else to say. The fact of the matter is that while I don't agree with U.S. policy on a variety of international approaches, and I hope those will change, and I've referred to some of them, while I think that the United States government did not have the basis to recognize the de jure result of this election, that it did not stand with the voice of the Armenian people.
About the findings of Policy for Armenia's latest analysis on elections, which showed that in polling stations where there was little or no fraud, Mr. Hovanissian was ahead of the incumbent by at least 4%, and a finding supported by other independent researchers. And also we found that the number 58% that was assigned to the incumbent was largely done as a result of outcome in polling stations where turnout was extremely high, 80% and up. It is this finding that was actually that mentioned in the OSCE's interim report, citing the degree of fraud and election irregularities, which brings me to my question. Call me paranoid, but please connect these dots for me, if you will. I'm looking at a miserably failed Armenian-Turkish reconciliation process, protocols of 2009, which Armenia's first ambassador to U.S., Ruben Shugarian, calls a perfect failure. I then look at the fact that the head of outcome, which was mediated by Switzerland, and then look at the fact that the OSCE observer team was led by a Swiss ambassador, which basically rubber-stamped, the team that basically rubber-stamped a clearly fraudulent election. And I'm looking at the fact that we're very close to 2015, the 100th anniversary of the genocide recognition. Connect those dots for me, if you will. Was there an expectation on the side of electoral monitors and people behind them do they expect something from the incumbent in 2015? Thank you.
Well, it's not a popular thing to say in Armenia, but I don't know. Because in our part of the world, we all know everything. I don't know. I'm not giving myself to conspiracy theories or to subterfuge, but it's not to be ruled out that certain positions taken by sovereign governments with respect to elections, their evaluation, their felicitation, are connected with expectations that they might or might not have on geopolitical issues, energy issues, security issues, and particular issues related to conflicts and normalization relations, for example, between Armenia and Turkey. I don't have evidence in that connection, but I don't rule out in the world of international relations that there might be points of nexus among the points that you raise. Of course, the OSCE's final report and extraordinary interim report were different from the preliminary report. It is interesting that the Constitutional Court in Armenia decided to bifurcate, to divorce from the basic consideration of our appeal. One of the major bases for invalidation, which will be heard separately in the month of June, and that is that thousands of Armenian schools and hospitals and public buildings, outside and inside on the different floors of hospitals, bore the campaign materials and the big photos and campaign posters of one particular candidate. And so I don't know that the Swiss ambassador in charge, Ambassador Heidi of the OSCE mission, had any particular geopolitical interest to find the way she did, but I will say that there was an evolution in the OSCE thinking. It was far more comprehensive than some of the other monitors, for example, from the Council of Europe. I think the Policy Forum Armenia report was very, very instructive. It was the kind of even judicial standard that the Constitutional Court did not entertain. I mean, how is it that when you have the average vote coming out of, what was it, 60% or something like that, you have the challenger winning, but right next door, a couple of blocks away, where you have 90% of the people voting, magic, then you have a big advantage for the incumbent. Or where the soldiers vote, 95% to 5%. And especially in villages, half of which, unfortunately, have broken families because the men are working as migrant laborers in Russia, where half of the village is empty, but you have 80 or 90% people voting in those villages. So it is not to be ruled out that there is some connectivity between those findings. I hope that that will ultimately be disproven, both in terms of how the U.S. and the OSCE approach the issues that are close to our heart and close to our interests. But first and foremost, David, I think that this is an issue for the Armenian people and our own citizens. And I think that we're almost there, but we're not quite there yet, and we need to continue. If there was one mistake that we all made together, or that I take upon myself, it was that it was so unexpected that we built an expectation among the average citizen that this thing would be resolved in one day. Just come out and we'll resolve it. Even though we would say it's a long-range struggle. Even though when we took the oath of New Armenia on April 9th, we said, we're not going to stand back. We're not going to surrender our state. This is a long-term quest for Armenian liberty and democracy. But still, it was so unexpected. And maybe the PR campaign that Gadin and Alec and Levin and others worked on was so effective that people thought that this time it's going to happen. And so there is a little bit of a disappointment, obviously, as you know, because they wanted action. And we tested the lines. We demanded to walk on our sidewalk, to go to the public offices that belong to the people, but we were not ready to do that by attending 10 funerals the next day or 100 funerals. Now, I may be criticized retrospectively that, that's the way you go. You look at Turkey, what's happening in Turkey today. Now it's a double-edged sword, and I said so at the State Department today. On the one hand, you never want your society to reach that tipping point, that danger, but that's also an indication that you have citizens who are active, and I think the Armenians, the Armenian people also have to sort of achieve in our own way, our own capacity, and find our formula for our national transformation. Evolution has not worked so far. There are those, therefore, who call for revolution. And I think the next couple of years will form the basis for the young people here represented to come back to Armenia, hopefully, and to take control of the first Armenian democratic administration to come.
Do you have time for just one more question? Next question.
Well, I just want to say there's a strange impression that somehow the events surrounding the election in Armenia were underreported in the West. And that was very different from, let's say, the elections in Georgia last fall. Does this have something to do with the European Union stance in this example? Because the European Union was quite active, visibly and somewhat behind the scenes involved in the Georgian elections. But was there any sort of engagement in what happened in Armenia, or is there a disengagement in regards to political events and democratization in Armenia?
That's a good question. In the previous round of presidential elections, I think the CNNs and the international media were on the spot when there was an outbreak of violence. I mean, violence triggers presence, unfortunately, in the international media. I do think that it was underreported. There were reporters from the U.S. and Europe and Russia, but it was not a big coverage. Even though one of the challenges was American-born, and there was that whole story. But I think, for example, since there wasn't, I give it as an example, since there wasn't on the table a CSTO versus NATO. I mean, there was not the sort of the geopolitical element as one of the major hallmarks. It was more a democracy thing. And I think that the international media, I don't know why they decided that, perhaps they decided, like many others, that it was a foregone conclusion. Because the organizations that did not participate in the elections, in a public explanation for their non-participation and their non-endorsement of an opposition candidate, were saying, well, we're not participating, therefore it's not non-competitive. And I'm very thankful for the support and outpouring of solidarity, organizational and emotional and otherwise, that came after the election, that came in the form of reports, of lobbying, of getting the information out. And I'm not one to sort of pout about the past. And then for the municipal elections that followed, we had a diaspora presence that was more institutional. But if we had all these pieces of the puzzle in play 6 months ago, before the election as opposed to after, we might have a different situation. But hope springs eternal, and we hope that the Armenian Spring will be a peaceful one. But as I said, only extraordinary solutions will be able to take Armenia out of the potential whirlpool in which it finds itself. Finally, human thought is not original. We all sort of take from each other and then go repeat it somewhere else. And this is a line that I used before, so it's not the first time I'm saying it, but I'd like now to make Susan's comment a complete one. She talked about sacrifice. My being in Armenia is not sacrifice. It's a decision that I had made. Having been the son, being the son of a prominent Armenian historian who wrote about the first Armenian Republic and was present with me as I raised the flag at the United Nations. But if there is one person who has sacrificed, it's been my wife, Armenia, who was born in Soviet Armenia, and at the age of 10 moved to the United States in search of liberty and democracy, and she thought she was marrying an Armenian-American lawyer, and she had visions of a villa on the Pacific Ocean. That girl just miscalculated. But having returned to her birthplace, she's done a wonderful job. She wrote the first textbook on civic education as the junior achievement, and a new center for handicapped or for disadvantaged children called Oran. So I'm very pleased and proud and blessed to have the support of my family and of a lot of Armenians who we have an issue of timing. We came out a little bit late this time around, but I think this gives us an opportunity to prepare better. And next time, I think the result will belong to the Armenian people. Thank you.